The chandeliers of Grosvenor Hall blazed like captured constellations, casting a trembling light across polished marble floors, gilded cornices, and the swaying silk of countless gowns. The orchestra's gentle murmur carried the cadence of waltzes through the vast ballroom. Yet even the music seemed to hesitate, faltering at the edges of society's collective gaze. All eyes, sharpened with curiosity and judgment, turned to the young woman who had just arrived, her arm entwined with that of the formidable Duke of Ashbourne, a man whose presence alone commanded both awe and trepidation. She was Eliza Wentworth, scarcely 20 and of modest, noble birth, her cheeks flushed with the cold bite of London air and the heat of relentless scrutiny. Her gown, a delicate shade of lilac trimmed with silver embroidery, seemed to shimmer under the crystalline lights, yet it did little to shield her from the whispers that drifted like smoke around her. "She is far too young," muttered one dowager, a fan fluttering like a trapped bird between her fingers. "What folly to marry a man who has known half a century." Another voice, lower and sharper, added, "He will tire of her long before she knows the true weight of his estates." Eliza's stomach knotted, but she lifted her chin, forcing her trembling lips into a polite, measured smile. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in the mirrored privacy of her dressing room, envisioning every polite bow and every carefully measured step. Yet, rehearsals could not account for the tide of judgment that surged around her. Each glance, each murmur, seemed to weigh upon her like a physical burden, pressing her against the walls of propriety and expectation. The Duke, towering and unyielding, remained composed beside her. His hair, a shade of silver that caught the candlelight, framed a face carved with severity and tempered by wisdom. Though society deemed him cold, even austere, there were moments, small, imperceptible to those beyond the immediate sphere of intimacy, when he displayed a gentleness that few could imagine. Today, he merely adjusted her glove with a careful hand, a touch so slight it might have been mistaken for a courtesy, yet sent warmth unfurling through her chest like spring sunlight. "Do not heed them, my dear," he murmured, his voice a low baritone that seemed to resonate beneath her very bones. There was no hint of impatience, no trace of condescension, only the steady assurance that, for all the eyes upon them, he had chosen her. Eliza inclined her head, her lips pressing into a delicate line, unsure whether relief or fear fluttered within her first. The orchestra shifted into a minuet, and couples glided with the precision of clockwork. A gentleman in a sapphire coat approached with a bow, ostensibly to request a dance, yet his eyes lingered with something more insidious. "May I have the honor, Lady Wentworth?" he inquired, though the title sounded more like a prelude to gossip than a mark of respect. Eliza's gaze flicked to the Duke, whose expression remained unreadable, but whose hand at her elbow was firm, protective. The gentleman's bow deepened, as though sensing the invisible boundary he dared not cross, and with a curt nod, he withdrew, melting into the swirl of swirling skirts and polite laughter. She exhaled softly, realizing that even a single dance could carry the weight of scrutiny heavier than any confrontation. A sudden ripple of laughter cut through the murmur of conversation, high and brittle, and Eliza felt her stomach twist anew. Two ladies, known throughout London for their sharp tongues and ruthless adherence to society's unspoken codes, leaned together, their eyes glittering with mischief. "A girl so green in the ways of the world," one whispered, "and yet she dares to clasp the arm of Ashbourne himself. Pray, how long before he tires?" Eliza's cheeks burned, but she held her posture, shoulders squared despite the flutter of anxiety that threatened to betray her calm. She reminded herself that this was the world she had entered by choice, a world in which whispered judgment was as certain as the ticking of a clock, and where dignity often teetered on the edge of ridicule. Yet beneath the anxiety, a spark of defiance ignited. She would not cower beneath the weight of scandal. She would step, however cautiously, into the light of her new life. The Duke guided her toward a more secluded alcove, where tapestries muted the sound of gossip and the golden glow of wall sconces softened the sharp angles of her anxiety. He did not speak immediately, allowing the comfort of his presence to settle around her like a protective cloak. When he finally broke the silence, it was with a quiet command of intimacy that drew her gaze to his. "They may scoff, Eliza, but their opinions are merely the rustling of leaves," he said, each word deliberate, weighted with sincerity. "What matters is not the chatter of society, but the truth we cultivate here in moments they cannot see." His eyes held hers, steady, unwavering, and for the first time that evening, the din of whispered cruelty seemed to fall away. In its place was a strange, unfamiliar warmth, a sense that, in his regard, she was more than the sum of judgmental glances. Eliza felt the first flicker of something forbidden yet exhilarating, a sense that perhaps she was not merely the subject of ridicule, but also the keeper of a secret shared only with a man who had chosen her entirely. Her lips parted, hesitant, yet she found courage in the steady gravity of his presence. I do not know how to meet their expectations," she confessed softly, her voice almost lost amidst the distant strains of music. "You need not meet them," he replied, his tone soft yet commanding. "Only your own heart." His hand brushed hers again, more insistently this time, and the simple contact sent a pulse of certainty through her uncertainty. Eliza realized, with a mixture of awe and relief, that she was not alone in this vast hall of judgment and expectation. A sudden bell tolled from the distant tower, signaling the hour, and the Duke inclined his head, a subtle yet unmistakable signal. He extended his arm, guiding her back into the flow of the ballroom, where society still watched, still whispered, still speculated. Yet now, armed with the quiet knowledge of his regard, Eliza walked with a newfound steadiness, each step a measured assertion of her presence and dignity. As they rejoined the swirl of dancers, a subtle tension lingered, taut as a drawn bowstring. The night was far from over, and the currents of scandal and intrigue would not abate. Yet beneath the polite smiles, beneath the gilded facades, a seed had been planted, a seed of understanding, of quiet devotion, of a bond that might one day eclipse the harsh whispers of London society. And so, with the Duke's hand lightly resting at her elbow, Eliza's gaze swept across the glittering expanse of the ballroom, and for the first time, she glimpsed the faint outline of a life that might belong to her entirely, a life in which judgment could be silenced, and where love, patient and deliberate, waited to be revealed. The carriage rattled along the cobbled lane leading to Ashbourne Manor, its wheels sending echoes through the quiet countryside that seemed almost conspiratorial in its hush. Eliza, nestled beneath a velvet shawl of midnight blue, gazed through the glass at the mist rising from the manicured gardens, each droplet of dew glimmering like suspended diamonds in the pale afternoon light. The world beyond these walls, London and its cruel gossip, felt distant here, yet she knew its shadows clung still, whispering in the hearts of those who had judged her at Grosvenor Hall. Inside the manor, the air was thick with the scent of polished oak, beeswax, and the faint perfume of roses that crept from the conservatory. It was a place where every object, every tapestry, bore the weight of generations, and yet, within these grand halls, there was room for intimacy, if one knew where to look. The Duke, tall and composed, led her by a hand that was both firm and considerate, his presence a steadying force in a world that had offered her little mercy. "Your first weeks will be trying," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience, yet the softness of understanding. "The house staff, the neighbors, even the occasional visitor, all will measure you against a standard that exists only in their imagination. Do not falter for their sake." Eliza's fingers tightened on the edge of her shawl, her mind teetering between relief and trepidation. "I had hoped," she murmured, "that in leaving London, I might escape their eyes, yet they follow, even here. They follow because they are idle and fearful of what they cannot control," the Duke replied, guiding her toward the drawing room, where afternoon tea had been laid upon silver trays. Here, You will find the world is quieter, the judgments less immediate, though still present in small, subtle ways. You must learn which to heed and which to let pass like wind through the trees. Eliza nodded, absorbing the lesson, even as her heart quivered with the delicate ache of self-consciousness. She had not married for convenience, nor for rank alone, yet the murmurs of society had cast her choice as folly. And yet, in the quiet attentiveness of her husband, she glimpsed a truth that London could not understand, a devotion patient, steadfast, and deliberately expressed in the smallest of gestures. It was that very afternoon, as she settled into the library, that she discovered the first of the Duke's clandestine attentions. A pressed violet, delicate and fragrant, had been slipped between the pages of a book she had been reading, its edges soft against the paper, a silent testament to his consideration. Eliza's breath caught. There was no grand declaration here, no society spectacle. Only a quiet acknowledgement that she was seen, valued, even adored in the most private of ways. In the days that followed, these tokens multiplied. A sketch of the manor gardens, tenderly rendered and tucked beneath her teacup. A short note, written in careful script, praising her understanding of poetry and her gentleness toward the children of the estate. Each gesture, small yet deliberate, contradicted the image London had painted of her as a naive, mercenary bride. Slowly, the threads of doubt and shame began to unravel, replaced by an awareness that she was loved wholly, not merely tolerated. Yet, as her confidence grew, so did the tendrils of rumor. Servants whispered in hushed corridors, neighbors watched from walled gardens, and the occasional visitor cast sidelong glances, assessing her every move. At a luncheon, Lady Pennington, a woman whose tongue was as sharp as her jewel-encrusted brooches, remarked with feigned concern, "It must be exhausting, my dear, to maintain such constant vigilance under the Duke's discerning eye. I do hope your youth can endure such scrutiny." Eliza smiled politely, concealing the flutter of indignation within her chest. "I am learning, madam," she replied, her voice calm yet firm, "that endurance grows with the measure of one's companions." The subtle glance she cast toward the Duke was enough to communicate her unspoken allegiance. She was not alone in facing the world's criticisms. The Duke, ever observant, inclined his head slightly, acknowledging both her restraint and her courage. He understood, as did she, that society's judgment was not easily silenced, yet small victories, quietly claimed, could shift perception over time. He began to orchestrate moments that, while unnoticed by the majority, allowed them a shared intimacy. An afternoon walk through the hedge-lined avenues, where he would press a hand to hers for guidance. A study session in the library, where the brush of his shoulder against hers was both accidental and deliberate. A carriage ride at dusk, the countryside stretching before them like a painted panorama, in which conversation flowed freely, unburdened by prying eyes. And yet, even within these sanctuaries, the whispers of scandal followed. A visiting dignitary commented on the remarkable patience of a man who had taken a bride so young. A distant cousin questioned the propriety of her sudden adeptness at the estate's management. Each remark, though polite, carried the sting of implication. She was still under observation, still required to prove herself in the silent courts of society. One evening, as a storm rattled the manor's windows and lightning illuminated the gardens in stark, fleeting brilliance, Eliza found a folded note resting atop her dressing table. The paper was perfumed faintly with lavender, the Duke's handwriting flowing like a ribbon across the page. "Even the fiercest storm cannot dim the light I see in you. Know that I watch, and that in every thought you are cherished." Eliza's fingers trembled as she read, a warmth spreading through her chest that no gossip, no ridicule, could extinguish. Here was a love unannounced to the world, yet absolute in its depth. Her heart swelled with a combination of awe and a quiet, guarded hope. Hope that the life she had entered with trepidation might, in fact, become a sanctuary. In the days that followed, the subtle tension between public observation and private intimacy grew more pronounced. She learned to navigate the whispers with grace, to respond to veiled criticism with dignity, and to treasure the Duke's small, deliberate gestures of affection as lifelines in a sea of societal scrutiny. Each gift, each touch, each whispered word was a reminder that love could exist beyond the rigid constraints of judgment, that devotion need not be proclaimed loudly to be transformative. Yet the world beyond the manor walls was not easily quelled. Rumors circulated among London's high society. A young bride with a much older duke, a woman whose beauty was said to be fleeting, a man whose heart had been hardened by loss. Each report reached the ears of those who had once scoffed at her, and though Eliza now possessed a quiet strength, a part of her could not ignore the lingering anxiety. How long would the Duke's quiet devotion be sufficient to counter the relentless tide of scrutiny? As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, the Duke approached, his figure framed by the setting sun and the gilded arches of the veranda. He extended his hand, a simple invitation to join him outside, yet the gesture carried a weight of intimacy and reassurance that needed no words. Eliza accepted, her fingers brushing his, and together they stepped into the encroaching evening, the storm now a distant memory behind the walls, the world beyond still watching, still judging. And yet, as they walked in silence through the fragrant gardens, the soft rustle of leaves beneath their feet, a quiet certainty took root within her. She was not merely a subject of ridicule. She was a companion, a confidant, a woman cherished by a man whose love was deliberate, patient, and unwavering. The path ahead was still fraught with challenge, still bound by the ever-present eyes of society. But for the first time, Eliza glimpsed the possibility that she could claim her own happiness, quiet, defiant, and resolute. The firelight in the library flickered across the polished mahogany shelves, casting shadows that danced like quiet confidences along the walls. Outside, rain pelted the manor windows in a steady rhythm, each drop a gentle percussion that seemed to echo the unspoken tensions between them. Eliza sat upon a velvet chaise, her hands clasped delicately in her lap, feeling the tremor of anticipation that had become familiar whenever she was alone with the Duke. He moved slowly across the room, placing a single candle upon the table, its flame illuminating the sharp angles of his features, softened only by the warm glow. "Sit with me," he said, his voice carrying that steady command that brooked no argument yet offered comfort in its certainty. Eliza obeyed, her posture precise, yet the racing of her heart betrayed a nervous eagerness she could not entirely conceal. She had learned much about the Duke's care in the weeks since their arrival at Ashbourne Manor. Tokens of affection, subtle guidance through the intricacies of estate management, and small, deliberate acts that quietly proclaimed his regard. Yet here in this room, the intimacy of words themselves seemed more potent than any gesture or gift. The Duke drew a chair close to the chaise and seated himself, his gaze holding hers with the intensity of one accustomed to being obeyed, but unaccustomed to being vulnerable. "Eliza," he began, his tone softer now, "you must know the truth of why I chose you." There was a pause, deliberate, almost as if each word was weighed against the gravity of its revelation. "Not because of beauty, though you possess it. Not for appearances, though society deems such things of paramount importance. I chose you because I have known a loneliness that few understand, a solitude sharpened by loss and tempered by duty. And in you, I saw a life I could hope to share, a heart I could trust with mine." Eliza's breath caught. She had expected declarations of affection, of course, but this was different. An unmasking, a laying bare of the Duke's soul, exposing the vulnerability that society never witnessed. Her chest tightened, a mixture of awe and fear, for she realized that the man before her, the one who had seemed impervious to judgment, carried within him the quiet ache of years spent in solitude and expectation. I did not know what to say," she whispered, her voice a fragile tremor against the roar of rain outside. "I have feared that the world sees only my youth, my inexperience, and assumes I am a mere interloper in a life I cannot comprehend." "You are no interloper," he said firmly, leaning slightly forward, the intensity of his gaze grounding her in a truth she could scarcely yet articulate. You are, in every sense, the one I have sought. And yet, I must confess, he paused, the bearish shadow crossing his features, that my care for you is not only for what you present to the world, but for the woman you reveal when the eyes of society are not upon us. Eliza felt warmth bloom in her chest, fragile and luminous. It was the first time she had heard a love expressed, not in grand proclamations or public gestures, but in words that acknowledged her essence, her individuality, the quiet strength she had cultivated amidst scrutiny and doubt. A soft breeze from the partially open window brought the scent of rain-soaked roses into the room, mingling with the faint trace of his cologne, and her fingers twitched as though yearning to reach out and close the small distance between them. "Do you believe me?" he asked, the question almost painfully intimate, a probe into the deepest recesses of her uncertainty. Eliza's eyes met his, steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. "I wish to," she admitted, "and yet I am still learning whether the world will allow such truths to exist without mockery." He reached for her hand, the gesture at once tender and commanding, his thumb brushing lightly against her knuckles. "Let the world speak as it will," he murmured. "What matters is not their perception, but ours. Here, now, in these moments, we may claim a space of honesty, of trust. Do you not wish to know that my regard is unwavering, that it endures beyond rumor, beyond expectation?" Eliza's lips parted, but no words came immediately, for the weight of his confession pressed upon her with the force of a tide. She felt tears threaten, not of sorrow, but of release, the release of fear, of shame, of the constant tension that had gripped her since her first arrival in London. I do wish it," she whispered at last, her voice breaking into the smallest of smiles, "for I have begun to see that my place is not merely beside you in public, but within the quiet chambers of your heart." The Duke inclined his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Then let us not defer what may be spoken in silence no longer," he said, his tones softened by intimacy, yet firm with purpose. "Eliza, there is nothing I desire more than to share all of my thoughts, all of my fears, all of my hopes with you. If you will allow me, I wish to reveal the man behind the title, the man whom society assumes to be immutable, impervious, unfeeling." The rain intensified, drumming against the windows in a cadence that seemed almost in harmony with the pulse of her own anticipation. She nodded, the faintest tremor of excitement and vulnerability passing through her. "I wish it too," she said, her voice gaining strength in the warmth of shared understanding. "I have feared that I am unworthy, that my youth and inexperience make me fragile in ways I cannot repair, yet—" Her gaze dropped momentarily, uncertain, then lifted again to meet his. "Yet I feel that with you, I may become capable of more than I imagined." For a long moment, they sat in silence, hands lightly intertwined, the firelight flickering across their faces in a private dance of illumination and shadow. The Duke's expression softened, lines of sternness melting into something gentler, more human, as he spoke again. "You have already become more than I dared hope," he said quietly. "Your courage, your wit, your gentleness, they have transformed this house into a home. And in doing so, they have transformed me." Eliza's breath came faster, a mingling of awe and disbelief. The man before her, powerful, feared, and admired by all of London, had chosen to reveal not merely his affection, but his vulnerability, his reliance upon her understanding and trust. It was an intimacy far more profound than any public declaration, a bond forged not in grandeur, but in the deliberate exchange of truth and feeling. Yet even as warmth and hope filled her chest, a faint shadow lingered, a whisper of doubt, the echo of London's judgment, a reminder that society would not remain idle. The words unspoken in the drawing rooms, the raised eyebrows in grand halls, the quiet murmurs of servants and neighbors, they waited beyond these walls, ready to intrude upon the fragile sanctuary they had claimed. The Duke seemed to sense her hesitation, for he gently lifted her chin with the tip of his finger, drawing her gaze to his unwavering eyes. "Let them whisper," he said, voice low, deliberate. "We are not their captives. We are the authors of this life, the stewards of its truth. And in time, they will see only what we allow them to see." A sudden clap of thunder punctuated his declaration, a reminder of the storm still raging outside. Eliza's fingers brushed against his once more, this time with quiet determination, as if to anchor herself to the promise of this shared understanding. She realized, with a mingling of awe and fear, that their lives had reached a precipice, the point at which private devotion could no longer remain unspoken, the moment when trust would demand full acknowledgement, and the heart would risk exposure in the face of society's scrutiny. And so, in the firelight of the library, with rain beating a steady rhythm upon the windows and the Duke's steady gaze fixed upon her, Eliza felt the fragile bloom of courage take root. She was no longer merely the young bride subjected to whispered gossip. She was a partner, a confidant, a woman entrusted with a man's heart and the promise of his unwavering devotion. The path forward was uncertain, the world beyond still judgmental. Yet for the first time, she knew that love, deliberate, patient, and profound, could endure even in defiance of society's relentless scrutiny. The grand ballroom of Ashbourne Manor was ablaze with crystal chandeliers, each flame reflecting in polished parquet, floors, and mirrored panels, casting the assembly in a light both dazzling and exacting. Guests murmured as they arrived, some drawn by curiosity, others by obligation, yet all were keenly aware that tonight's gathering would be unlike any other, a spectacle not merely of social display, but of an unspoken drama, a revelation that would ripple through London society like a stone cast into still water. Eliza's heart fluttered beneath the soft folds of her ivory gown, embroidered with threads of silver that caught the candlelight like trapped stars. She felt the weight of expectation pressing upon her, yet beneath it lay the solid warmth of the Duke's hand, holding hers as they entered the hall together. Whispers followed their entrance, as inevitable as the ticking of a clock. "Is it true? She stands beside him without fear. I have heard she is remarkable, but still so young." The comments were polite, yet edged with disbelief, for no woman of 20 had yet dared to claim such a place beside a man of power and renown. The Duke, tall and composed, moved with his customary grace, but tonight there was a subtle shift, a softness around the eyes, an openness in his expression, as though he had resolved to reveal to the world the devotion he had long reserved for private spaces. He guided Eliza to the center of the room, where the assembled company could see, yet not interrupt, the quiet intimacy of the moment. For a heartbeat, the chatter hushed, replaced by a tangible expectation, a sense that the air itself had thickened with the weight of observation. The Duke raised his hand, calling for attention not with the brusque authority of a master, but with the calm certainty of one whose words carried truth. "My friends," he began, voice resonant yet measured, "tonight is not merely a gathering of acquaintances or a display of fortune and pedigree. It is an occasion to acknowledge what is often left unspoken, yet ought never be concealed." His gaze swept across the room, firm and unwavering, and then returned to Eliza. "Lady Eliza Wentworth has come to this house with courage, grace, and a fortitude that surpasses her years. She has endured scrutiny, whispers, and the judgments of those who cannot perceive the heart beneath appearances." A murmur rippled through the guests, some startled, others genuinely moved, but all aware that the Duke was speaking with an authenticity that could not be ignored. Eliza felt warmth surge through her chest, a combination of pride and disbelief, for in this moment, the man she had feared might see her as fragile or inexperienced had made her the focus of admiration, the bearer of a truth no gossip could distort. "More than this," the Duke continued, his voice softening, carrying the intimacy of private confession into the public sphere, "I wish to proclaim, for all to hear, that my esteem for Lady Eliza is profound. Her intellect, her kindness, and her spirit have transformed this house into a home, and my heart into something fuller, something richer than I dared hope it could be after years of solitude. His eyes, steady and luminous, held hers in a gaze that spoke more eloquently than words alone. Eliza's lips parted, and she felt the tremor of emotion that had once been concealed beneath layers of social anxiety now rise unabated. She inclined her head in acknowledgment, but her voice, though quiet, carried the sincerity of her soul. "My lord, your faith in me, your trust, and your affection have made me stronger than I imagined possible. I am honored not only by your regard, but by the life we share, the intimacy that grows beyond the reach of judgment." The room seemed to hold its breath, the orchestra silent, the chandeliers shimmering as if in quiet applause. Eyes that had once flickered with doubt now softened, some widening with astonishment, others smiling with genuine admiration. In that instant, Eliza realized that the whispers of scandal, the shadows of gossip, and the judgments of society could no longer touch the bond they had forged. Their love, patient and deliberate, had been unveiled, and in its revelation, it shone with a brilliance that no shadow could diminish. As the evening unfolded, guests approached with varying degrees of humility and curiosity. Lady Pennington, previously a thorn in Eliza's consciousness, curtsied with a careful grace and murmured, "Your courage, Lady Eliza, is inspiring." Eliza inclined her head, acknowledging the words with quiet dignity, her eyes meeting the Duke's in a shared, private triumph. Even those who had doubted could not deny the presence of authenticity, of devotion made tangible through steady conduct and the deliberate care of a man who, for all his years, had chosen to love without reservation. Later, as the crowd dispersed into the smaller salons and drawing rooms, the Duke led Eliza to the terrace overlooking the gardens, now bathed in the silver glow of moonlight. The rain from earlier had left the foliage glistening, each leaf catching the pale luminescence like fragments of starlight. The scent of wet earth and roses mingled with the cool night air, and for a moment, the grandeur of society seemed distant, irrelevant. He took her hands in his, the same hands that had guided, protected, and encouraged her in private spaces, and spoke with the intimacy that had always existed between them, but now carried the weight of public acknowledgement. "Tonight, the world has seen what I have known from the beginning," he said softly. "You are not merely my companion, Eliza, you are the keeper of my heart, the witness to my truest self. The fortunate one is not I, though society would claim otherwise. It is you, whose courage and virtue have transformed not only my life but the course of both our destinies." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but they were tears of profound joy rather than sorrow. She pressed her forehead briefly against his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne, a blend of cedar and faint lavender, and felt the certainty of their bond deepen with each heartbeat. "I am fortunate indeed," she whispered, "not because of titles or wealth, but because I am loved wholly, without pretense, without hesitation. Your devotion has made all the trials of society's judgments seem insignificant, and for that, I am grateful beyond words." He lifted her chin with a gentle hand, their eyes meeting in a gaze that required no further declaration. The soft brush of his lips against hers was brief, yet infinite, a promise and an acknowledgement that the private truths of their hearts had triumphed over the scrutiny and whispers of the world. For a moment, the gardens, the manor, and even the distant halls of London society ceased to exist. There was only this unspoken, unwavering devotion that neither time nor criticism could diminish. As they stepped back into the warmth of the manor, the Duke's arm resting lightly against hers, Eliza felt a sense of completion, a quiet fulfillment of a journey begun with uncertainty and fear. The world could still murmur, still question, still whisper doubts, but within the walls of Ashbourne Manor, and in the steadfast gaze of the man she now called her own, she had found a sanctuary of love, patience, and unassailable devotion. And in that sanctuary, the final judgment of society no longer mattered. Eliza had been seen, truly seen, and the love that had once existed only in small gestures, letters, and whispers had been made visible, undeniable, and enduring. She was, at last, the fortunate one, cherished not for her age, her beauty, or her station, but for the heart she had revealed and the life she had courageously chosen to share.